Today's Old Testament passage continues a preaching series that Dan and I have been doing across the summer of the heart of the story of our faith. And we began early with the story of Abram and God choosing Abram. Many times choosing people out of obscurity, ones who have not been stand out, but to God, they did stand out in particular ways. It has been just a wonderful remembrance of all of those people that God chooses. Today, we turn to Jacob, as Dan talked to the kids about, and this is Jacob's dream at Bethel. Listen for God's word. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, Jacob put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth and the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside Jacob and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give you, and to your offspring, and your offspring shall be like dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I've promised you. And then Jacob woke up from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, which means house of God. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, we give you thanks for the heart of our faith and those who were courageous and faithful and stepped out of their comfort zones to follow you. May we hear these stories and incorporate them as our own, knowing that you are in this place and that you make it holy, and we are here too. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So, out of nothing, or what seems like an ending, God is creating a nation. God is creating a people. God begins this with an obscure man, a name among a whole genealogy of names, and a barren woman. The story of Israel begins with Abraham, a son among many, many descendants of Noah. God chose Abraham out of relative obscurity to leave everything that grounded and defined him to go to a place that God would show him. And Abraham did follow God's lead, and God did bless Abraham's faithfulness with a place and a people and a purpose, a home, a family, and work to do. This was a generational blessing and a promise, one that would be passed down from parent to child. With those tangible blessings of a place and a people and a purpose, God also gave a relationship with him. As Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann says, there is in Genesis no one generational faith. The blessing of home and family and work to do in hand with the presence of God would be a perpetual blessing, one that is passed down from one generation to the next, though not smoothly, and in fact, often in a very messy style, as inheritance happens sometimes. But this inheritance is about the family of God and God's inheritance. Dan preached last week on the mess of the story of Abraham's grandsons, fraternal twins Esau and Jacob. As different as they could be in appearance and personality, and though no parent wants to be seen playing favorites, the Genesis story is not shy to say that Father Isaac loved Esau and Mother Rebekah loved Jacob. These two brothers live in tension because of their differences. There's tension because of their allegiance. There's tension in the family, and there is tension because Jacob will steal the blessing that belongs to his older brother. It is messy. Dan said the story of the twins' birth suggests that life is going to be very contentious for these two, and that God's blessing is threatened by the very people who are part of this promise. Jacob is going to live in the midst of conflict, and life is going to be messy. I wonder if you know what it's like to live a messy life, or messy seasons of life. We all have experienced that. The question in this story is, will God's blessing survive this messiness? In a classic book that was used in seminary on faith development theory, John Westerhoff asked this question about the survival of faith in this way. He puts it and gives it the title is, will our children have faith? That's a question that I ask all the time. I ask it for my own children. I ask it for the children of the church. Will our children have faith? Westerhoff writes that faith communities modeled themselves on the school instructional paradigm of our secular schools. He suggested that the church has the habit of sending our children off to Sunday school expecting someone else to teach them about God in 1 hour every week, instead of expecting faith formation to happen within a variety of contexts of life: the family, church, school, church, school. Their children instead learn facts about religion. But he asked, will they learn or experience faith? How can we be faith communities that nourish and nurture the faith in children instead of only teaching them the facts of religion? For Westerhoff, faith is expressed, transformed, and made meaningful by people sharing their faith in an historical, tradition-bearing community of faith. Christian educator Delia Halverson says one of the most significant parts of Westerhoff's book, and it has gone through many generations, even though it was written in the 70s, it continues to be a seminal book for our reading. One of the most significant parts is an understanding of how our faith moves through a variety of styles, and that we don't leave one style of faith for another, but we continually learn and develop our relationship with God using all styles. The style of inquiring and searching faith is very important, for unless we inquire into the beliefs that have been taught us as children, we will never make that belief our own. Too often, older teens and young adults leave the church because the church does not allow them to think through and come to their own conclusions about their belief. They did not have clarifiers of faith. Halverson goes on, if parents realize how our faith develops and then looks for spontaneous opportunities to share their faith, sometimes by simply saying, look at those tiny legs that God gave those ants, sometimes they can be the spiritual mentors for their children. Today, as we read Genesis 28, all distractions out of the way, Jacob's faith is clarified. God becomes very personal for Jacob out in a very lonely place. The messiness of life has caught up with him, and Jacob is running. This Jacob will be remembered by future generations as a pillar of faith, but not yet. Today, he is running. He is running from mistakes and bad decisions from his brother who is spewing threats against his life. And though Jacob is told to leave for Haran to find a spouse, he is forever looking over his shoulder at the place that he has left. The story is set at dusk. Jacob is forced to stop running because it's too dark to see. And he finds himself, says the writer, in a certain place. Perhaps it could be any place. In fact, it is a place between places. It is a liminal space, as has become important for me to see parts of life. A place that is no longer threat, and yet it is not quite safe. Perhaps it is a level place. Perhaps it is a place that allows a breather, where Jacob is only going to rest and then he's going to start all over again. It is here in an unnamed place, at the most vulnerable moment of sleep, that God speaks to Jacob for the first time. Perhaps you found yourself in such a place, physical or otherwise. I have been dreaming a lot this week as I've been reading about Jacob's dreams. Perhaps it is I'm just more aware of those. Perhaps you have had that unnamed place or a retreat, a time that you came to a level place and you could think about things, a retreat or a quiet moment, a messy place like a hospital room, a place where you could choose to be away from routine, or in a lonely place where you're separated by others, by choice, by anger, by brokenness, by messiness. God finds Jacob and appears to him in a dream. He dreams a beautiful dream of a ladder, or Old Testament scholars said that it might be something akin to a ramp between heaven and earth. You know, it's like one of those vivid dreams when you don't know if you're awake or are you asleep. There's a spiritual that you may remember. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. But instead of climbing to God in his dream, Jacob sees angel messengers of God doing the ascending and descending on this ladder. And it stretches to the heavens and to earth. But the Lord is not standing in the heavens or on the ladder, but instead the Lord is standing right beside Jacob. Jacob, after considering the dream, said, "Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I didn't know it." And later, Jacob names it, this place is none other than the house of God. It is the gate of heaven. The ladder did not take Jacob to God, nor did it bring God to Jacob. But the dream revealed to Jacob that God was already in this unnamed place. For the first time, God speaks to Jacob, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, the God of Isaac." God has a history with Jacob's family and is known by them, by grandfather Abraham, father Isaac, and now by Jacob himself. God will be known. And in what is a very personal moment of faith, God gives Jacob the promise that he first gave Abraham, and even more. He promises them a place, a people, a purpose. And even more, God says, I will be with you. Wherever you go, I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised. So the story will continue. And in a story where names mean everything, we cannot miss the fact that Jacob is still Jacob. Jacob does not get a new name. Jacob, the name, means trickster and means supplanter and heel grabber. It is a reminder of what he has taken from his brother, of what is the nature of his personality, which is to fool people and to get what he wants. Jacob is still Jacob. Even when God blesses him, Jacob wants more, and Jacob puts a condition on that blessing. And he will leave that place still on the run, but he has this promise in his hand. God, who meets him in a certain place, will guide him to become a faithful follower, but not yet. Jacob is still Jacob. It will be 20 years from this point that Jacob will return to Bethel, having 20 years of maturity, 20 years of knowing better who God is, 20 years and with a new name. Jacob will become Israel, but not yet. I find Jacob's story hopeful for all of us, for our children, for the church. In answer to the question, will our children have faith? The passing down of the promise of God is the work of God. We have been learning through all these stories from Genesis thus far, throughout the messy lives of very imperfect people whom God chose and God chooses. God shows up, and God redeems and guides forward towards whatever God intends for the nation of believers, even from and toward and in unlikely places. This story reminded me of Francis Thompson's The Hound of Heaven, the long poem of the loving presence of God that comes again and again and again, seeking out the one who runs. It is love, and out of love that God does that. Coinciding with our focus on the heart of faith this summer, in the adult Sunday school class, every July, we gather together all our classes for study. And this year, Dan has been asking different ones from the congregation to speak to their own faith stories. And it's been wonderful and fascinating and a blessing to hear you all's stories. Last week, in our class, Norma Knight told the story about her father. And she said this. She said, we lived in the country, it was western Pennsylvania, with no real towns close by. Each community usually had a name associated with the area, but not a formal name. The schoolhouse community was called Sloan, and it was after a man who originally owned that property. The town was so small that it wasn't even on the map. Norma's father was a farmer and a man of great faith. Norma said that her father talked about God all the time, to those who would listen and to those who wouldn't. The Sloan community had asked for a Sunday school, and 2 missionaries from what was known as the American Sunday School Union came to talk to them about starting one. But the 2 men had too many Sunday school services that they were doing, and so Norma says they asked my father if he would be willing to start a Sunday school in that community. And he was perfectly willing to do this, Norma says. But then the ladies of Sloan wanted a church service as well. And that's when Norma's father began to ask God for a sign. He was not as comfortable preaching every Sunday. So he asked God for a sign. And he and Norma's mother prayed about this, and they read the Bible to discern an answer. Her father asked God for a specific sign. He asked that on the first Sunday, that if 20 people would show up for church, he would start the church. And he was confident that would not happen. There were not 20 people who could show up. So he thought that that was a safe prayer. But the sign did come when the next Sunday, 20 people showed up for what would be the first Sunday worship. Norma's father would teach and preach there for 3 years until he handed it over to someone else to lead. And then he would become an active lay preacher for the rest of his life. At the heart of the story of our faith, God shows up, and it is never accidental. Earth is a place of possibility because it has not been and will not be cut off from the sustaining work of God. Someone needs to hear this word of hope today, that wherever you are, however messy it is, God is there. God is in that place, making it your own Bethel. Even in the nameless, desolate, hopeless places where change never happens, where people never show up, there can come a shining light that bridges the gap between heaven and earth. And that is where God is. Amen.